Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Madison Cote here from the ESIO, the Edmonton Screen Industries office. And today, our guest is Mark Darrah, a veteran of the games industry with over 20 years dedicated to making some of the most beloved games of all time. Most notably, Mark is known for his work with leading the Dragon Age series. From Baldur's Gate to Mass Effect, Mark has had a profound impact as a masterful storyteller and leader in the games industry. I've invited Mark here today to provide some old game dev advice and to tell stories from the trenches that we hope will provide you with some wisdom in your life and for you game devs out there, your games. So, Mark, I'm going to start off with probably the easiest question you've ever been asked. I'm kidding. It's the fun one is what is the one thing in your career that you could say you're most proud of?
So I think there's sort of I kind of have three answers to that question. I think the game I'm most proud of is probably Dragon Age Inquisition. I think it is the game where we got the most things on the page, so to speak. Um, it it is closest to its vision. I think the project I'm most proud of is actually probably Dragon Age 2. That is a game that definitely has flaws and definitely has its detractors on the internet. But given what it was and how quickly it was done, that is a time where I think I sort of came into my own as a leader, and that team did things that honestly, looking back, are basically impossible. I think that the sort of time that I'm most proud of was my time on Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood. So that was a very small team. That was only 22 people, or 20-ish. And I think that experience really cemented for me the power of a small team, the power of people wearing a lot of different hats. So not a nice clean answer for you, Madison, but there's my answer.
No, I think that's fantastic. I think one thing that people often talk about is Baldur's Gate being a very green team and coming out of the gates with maybe a little bit of shattered steel under their belts, but really you came directly out of school onto that team. So I think definitely watching you evolve over the years and turn into this absolute powerhouse of a leader for Dragon Age, it is something that's really, really amazing to see, like you said. And sometimes working with those small teams, like with Sonic Chronicles, it's a totally different experience.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's an incredible amount of power in someone who doesn't know what's not possible. Um, I think as you get more experience and you've fallen in a lot of holes, you start seeing holes in a lot of different places and you start avoiding them. And sometimes those holes don't exist anymore. Sometimes the world has changed and the marketplace has moved on or technology has moved on. And that's really what happened, I think, in the case of Baldur's Gate is really computer RPGs it was basically a dead genre in the late 90s. And that was sort of that was the knowledge, that was what was known, and we made a game and it turns out, well, actually it wasn't dead. It was completely ready for a revival.
Yeah, I think we definitely saw that revival of RPGs, and there were people looking for it. They just didn't know what they were missing. And I think we all saw that with Fallout as well, coming out around the same time, and just it really led to that renaissance. One of the things that we often talk about is there's little Easter eggs that we put into things. And Baldur's Gate, I've heard a rumor that the trees are actually all pictures from the river valley here in Edmonton.
That, I think, it may be true. I don't actually remember if that is true or not, but it probably is. Someone pointed out in one of my videos that we had a very distinct landscape. I think you sometimes forget, but yes, I guess the river valley is sort of spruce trees and poplar trees, and it is a very distinctive look, as it turns out. For me, it just looks like generic forest, but I guess not.
Definitely. So technically, when you go on your walks with your videos, you're almost walking through the outer world of Baldur's Gate there. So
That's right.
that's a fun fact there, definitely. I mean, Baldur's Gate's role in reviving Western RPGs cannot be understated. it's impacted every game moving forward, especially from BioWare. But I was kind of wondering if you could tell us about, because you built the entire conversation system for Baldur's Gate. Um, is that something that you would attribute to like a wicked problem, or
Uh,
was that kind of your baby?
So I definitely didn't know what I was getting into when it came to doing the conversation system for Baldur's Gate. I think when you sit down and think about how a conversation should work, actually looking back from here, I think someone who had ever worked in theater or ever done anything like that would have had a better chance of it, because like a script for a TV show or a play is written in this sort of back and forth way, and there's scenes are demarcated. And when you look at the conversation systems that were written after Baldur's Gate, that's how they're written. It's this is a conversation. All the actors and speakers are included in that. But when I was approaching it, having not had that background, for me, it was just like, well, I guess we just need to collect everything this guy says in a thing that he knows about, and collect everything this guy says in a thing he knows about, and we'll just sort of mesh them together. It works, but it definitely isn't a logical way to collect things together in retrospect.
For sure. And I think in your one video, you talked about the role of Biff, the understudy, kind of helping that out. Is that something you wanted to tell us a little bit more about?
Yeah, so Biff the understudy is if so it's a final layer of air handling in the Baldur's Gate conversation system. So if it needs an actor, someone's supposed to speak, like the person's missing for the next line. Ideally, there would have been scripting there to say, well, if this person is dead, do this line instead. But sometimes it would fall through, and if that happened, then it spawned this one-off character that came in, said the necessary lines because someone had to say them, and then disappeared. And I really think that I honestly think that's a really important thing. I think people sometimes tend to outsmart themselves. I think what you see sometimes is an implementation of something, to use the conversation system again, where, well, we'll just write it so that these lines never fire. But you can never really be 100% confident in game development. It's the problems are so complicated. There are so many variables coming from so many different sides, multiplayer timing, or just multitudes of different things that can trigger things that you didn't expect and didn't plan for. So putting some sort of backup behind your backup, I think, is just something that I think is just good practice. And I know that there are cases where that's not appropriate, where you're in the performance critical bit of your graphics loop, and you just can't afford to have that one extra if then. But most of the time, I think that we can afford that extra expense. I mean, Baldur's Gate runs on a Pentium 133, so if we can make that work, I think we can afford the extra check, the extra suspenders to go with our belt on a lot more of our development, honestly.
Definitely. So is that kind of how you approach problem solving in general? Is it kind of the overarching thing of making sure that you do have backups when you can?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that for me, um, you can, like, there's a phrase, trust but verify, and I think that is really the way to approach problems. Is, yes, absolutely, build your solution, trust in your solution, trust in the people, but then verify that things are right, and if they aren't right, have a fallback.
Definitely. I think that's really important when you're building massive games and massive worlds. Like the Dragon Age universe is beyond, even when you were talking about Inquisition. I think it's just under 1 million words of
That's right.
dialogue.
Yeah. At one point, someone wanted to compare it in length to the number of words in the Bible, but someone wisely pointed out that maybe this was not a good place to anchor your PR message. But yeah, it definitely is. It's very big. And if you think that like a novel runs in somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 words, our games are many books in length.
Definitely. So when it comes to even starting to build that team for the Dragon Age universe, how is that? How do you approach building a team like that?
Yeah, it's interesting because at BioWare, some of it was there was a certain degree of predestination. This team's core is going to be formed out of the core of the team that came before. But I do think for me that you want people that can make decisions. Um, that's not actually a universally held belief. I think some people like people who can follow direction. But for me, I want people that can push back, that can make their own decisions, that you can give the decision-making power away, because ultimately the job of a leader isn't necessarily to make a decision, it's to cause a decision to be made, and much less work to have someone else make the decision and then just stand behind them and support them in that than to have to make every single decision yourself. So when I'm looking to build a team, I think a lot of it is about personalities that can work together, personalities you understand. Um, I'm a big fan of oddly shaped tools because you never know when you need a hex wrench or a triangular screwdriver. And honestly, if you know you have a hex wrench, then that opens up possibilities that you otherwise wouldn't have. So I like building the game to the team you have a little bit more than building the team to the game you're building when you can.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, especially when you come to a game that has the scope and the size, like the scale of these games is just absolutely massive with huge depth and breadth. And how do you even begin to manage something like that?
Yeah, a lot of it. So if you look at, say, Baldur's Gate compared to things that I worked on after that. So Baldur's Gate, when I was still working as a lead programmer, the code base is small enough that you can kind of almost hold that in your head. Even Jade Empire, you can kind of hold that in your head. I mean, you don't know every line of code, but you sort of know basically the parts and how they work together and how they fit. When you move into something like Frostbite, which has like 10 million lines of code, that's not possible anymore. It's impossible. You have to use you need delegation. You need to have a strong vision, and you need to keep reiterating that vision so that everyone, or at least as many people as possible, are pulling in the same direction. And maybe not exactly the same direction. Maybe you're going to have like even a 45-degree deviation off center, but still that's forward progress. And you need to accept that deviation. And honestly, to some degree, embrace it, because that person that's pulling really hard 45 degrees off center, well, maybe actually that's now the game you want to make, and you need to let that happen, as opposed to just constantly yanking people back to center, because that's pulling out some of their enthusiasm, pulling out some of their momentum. Now, there's a point at which they're no longer pulling forward, they're pulling backwards. And so you do have to at some point say, like, this is the vision, this is the direction, at least pull in a direction that is providing some forward momentum.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you're talking about different leadership styles as well, I've heard rumors that certain games, the ship in the game is how they run it. And for other ones, it's more of that collaborative approach, but also empowering your employees. So that's absolutely wonderful to hear that there have been so many people who have been able to have impact on these games, because they've meant a lot to a lot of people. I mean, you just have to look at your Twitter page to see all of the love and support that comes your way with the fan art and the tattoos, and people just they love this game so much.
That's the thing I love about Dragon Age, is that it is a game that is driven by characters. And the reason why I think that matters to people is because that's an opportunity to see yourself in a game, or see something that you wish you were or wish you weren't, and work through some of that. And um, that's something that I think is just super powerful. And the big thing you get, when you can meet people in person is people that for the first time realized something about themselves because they saw it reflected back at them through a game, or it got them through a hard part of their life because it was just there, even as escapism. But I think that's really what makes Dragon Age really special to me.
Yeah, and even, we've seen with Baldur's Gate, I think someone from IGN said it was like playing with your friends, even when you weren't with your friends.
Yeah, I mean, Baldur's Gate was really trying to capture D&D at the table. And I think for its time, I think it did an okay job of that. I think really that in a lot of ways, followers and companions for BioWare come from that. That's the seed is, well, we can't emulate D&D at the tabletop completely, but we can make a character who's like the best possible person to play D&D with, who can be really into their character and just the best role player. And maybe they can't react to everything kooky you're doing because they're not real, but they can feel real in the moment. And I think when you draw a line from Baldur's Gate through to Dragon Age, you can really see how the character started as almost a stopgap for that tabletop experience and turned into, I think, the biggest, most important thing that BioWare does.
Yeah, and when you talk about that seed as well, having these options to be good or to be the stock of evil, like having these options has been such an important part of these games and being able to explore your personality. So I really love when you say that because that's been a huge part that people have really enjoyed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's critical to these games, that if you can play a game that has a great story where you're in a pre-made character and on a pre-made line. And I think there are games that tell stories better than BioWare that are like that. But it's the characters and the followers and that interaction and reflection of the characters and followers that I think makes them something special.
Yeah, and we've kind of heard from some of our other developers as we've been talking throughout the weekend about that community aspect and whether it's working as a dev or playing games, like community is such an important part of things and Edmonton has such a unique environment with having AAA presence here but also a thriving indie scene. So is that something that you've kind of heard from the community as well here, that they've really enjoyed being able to play your games and play them how they would want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, there are places in the world where game development is such a major part of the industry that you can't walk 5 feet without someone recognizing you. Edmonton's not like that, but we do still have a strong community, and I think it's better in a way because we get to have a certain degree of independence and freedom of thought and freedom of action. I love that we have seen an ever growing indie scene and more developers getting their footing, getting bigger, coming into their own, because I think that's healthy and just strengthens everything for everyone.
Oh, definitely. It's the ecosystem approach, right?
Yeah.
And success for one is success for all. And just having these variety of ideas is amazing too, because like you said, there are different ways of telling stories. But for you, you really started in a very technical role and ended up in quite a leadership role, overseeing a massive project as executive producer. Is that for that journey? How did that even get started?
So I have a computer science background. So my job choices were BioWare or IBM. Um, and for me, I think if I was looking back, I think if I was entering the game industry now with as I was 23 years ago, I would be entering as probably a technical game designer. I think my background, while I have computer science background, I think my D&D background and my game development background are much more leaning towards game design than they are towards the technical aspect. When I look at the quality of programmers that exist in video game development these days compared to the kind of programmer I was. I'm very much a binder twine and duct tape kind of programmer, which, you know, it gets the job done, but you can see the quality of the code and the quality of the engineering coming out these days, and it's just leaps and bounds beyond what I'm capable of doing. I think, honestly, the way that I transitioned from programming to production was just a series of being the right person in the moment. Like, there's a lot of luck involved, where like they needed someone to lead programming on Baldur's Gate 2, and I was the person most willing to sort of step into that gap. They needed someone to take over Sonic when the producer moved to Dragon Age, so I was the person with the strongest leadership ability there at that moment, and then it's just sort of snowballed from there. So I think there is, in my career, there's a lot of cases where it's, you know, the right person, or even a right enough person in the right place at the right moment.
Oh, definitely. There's always a lot of luck in game development, that's for sure. And I think seeing that now, we're seeing this kind of following that you're gaining with this old game dev advice channel. And there's so many indie developers that are just blown away that you're giving this advice away for free and wandering around in the river valley and having a good time while you're at it. But just the lessons that they haven't learned by being at a AAA studio and by kind of starting out in this, it's been invaluable to them. So is that something that you're just kind of having fun with right now, or do you see kind of moving towards that in the future?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I right now I'm just sort of exploring the space. I do think that, you know, there's an opportunity to pass on some of the things that I've learned, and certainly, while I wouldn't say that every game developer should work in AAA, I would say that there are lessons that AAA can impart, or at least mistakes that it can impart that can be avoided in the indie space. Um, I do think that we'll see where I end up in a year's time, but for right now, yeah, I'm just sort of figuring things out. I hope people are getting value out of it, because that's my goal. I mean, if I can avoid someone else falling into the same hole that I fell into, or helping them make a better decision, or stick to a decision, or avoid some death march crunch on a project that they're leading, then it's all worth it.
Definitely, and I think we do see that already. Even when I was watching your videos, I had somebody just be like, "That can you take notes for me?" I'm like, "No, they're free on YouTube. Like, go and check it out because it's absolutely amazing." And this is the one thing where we really do see that Edmonton community and people who've worked in Edmonton. They're just it's a different breed of game developer that we've seen, and just being open to helping others is definitely something that we've seen from every aspect. So I think the community definitely appreciates that, and having access to someone like you is just beyond what they could imagine.
Yeah,
And
and I hope that I can provide, you know, even more over the next while.
yeah, I'm sure I would be remiss if I didn't ask if you know of any Easter eggs that anybody hasn't found, maybe an Edmonton one, but I gotta know.
Hmm, that is a good question. I Everything is escaping me at the moment. I think there are Easter eggs that have not been found, but I can't think of any right now.
Good to know. Yeah, no, we always look for those hidden like 780s and whatnot and things. But it's good to know that people there's still surprises out there because, like you said, it's been 20 years and it's these games are still popular. People still love them, and we'd love to continue showing people all the little tricks and pieces here. I had someone ask if you could explain how cheese ended up in Dragon Age.
So I'm pretty sure that it's actually simply that in Dragon Age Origins, the it was a prop. It's a prop that is pretty good quality. And, you know, cheese wheels are of various sizes, so it's a good prop to kind of be able to shrink or grow and kind of stick in a corner. And it's actually I think it's as simple as that. I mean, we've certainly moved past that at this point. Now it's definitely intentional a lot more than it isn't. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to have a prop that you can that will fit anywhere basically. You can scale it up or down. You can put it on a table. You can put it in a corner. It can be 3 feet across. It can be 3 inches across, and they both make sense.
I think that's the best advice we can give is find something that is your cheese wheel.
Until this moment, I hadn't considered that, but yes, I do think that it is actually very useful because otherwise you end up having to have a bunch of different props. And I mean, not that that's a problem, but it's nice to have something you can go to that can fill a gap in an emergency.
For sure. So if people did want to hear from you a little bit more or where to find you, where would we send them?
So I'm still on Twitter. My Twitter handle remains at BioWare Mark Darrah, and I am on YouTube at Old Game Dev Advice.
Definitely. And like I said, I highly recommend it, even for those who are maybe a little bit farther along in their journey. It's always good to have reminders, right? Of keeping yourself back in check, making sure you don't get that scope creep. And I feel like you're definitely the one to tell people how to avoid scope creep.
Definitely fallen victim to myself in over the years.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Mark. And we look forward to seeing what you have coming next because we've loved everything that you've done. So can't wait to see what is next on the journey for you.
Me too. I am looking forward to the journey. Thank you, Madison.
For sure. Thanks.